This sounds like a stupid question.
Probably is, because, yeah, go ahead. Skilled managers equals high morale, which equals all that cool stuff that you cannot pay for and you can't punish for.
When you close off that feedback channel, you are not going to be able to hear the truth.
In the first microseconds, your brain can't tell the difference between physical danger and what we call social danger.
I'm pissed off at you.
Me, specifically?
Well, just because you're my boss and all.
Employees tend to get promoted until they reach their level of incompetence. Go forward and don't suck.
Hey. All our dear listeners out there, thanks for tuning in for another episode of the Managing with Mind and Heart podcast. I'm Ethan Nash, one of your co-hosts. And with me today, as always, or at least usually, is my partner in crime, Mr. Mike Nash. Hey there.
It's great to be with everyone here again.
Folks, I'm excited to have this conversation today with my dad here and partner in business. And we're talking today again about mindfulness. Meditation and mindfulness is pretty mainstream, right? A lot of organizations are providing their employees resources and trainings in this area. I think just in general, people have discovered it is really useful for, I think, just living a more grounded life, a more centered life, just overall kind of mental health and well-being. So excited to have this conversation with you today. And I just want to remind listeners that in episode 33, we did a conversation about mindfulness and meditation. And in that episode, we covered kind of a lot of our backgrounds and kind of paths to discovering mindfulness and meditation and what that's kind of done for us, as well as how we think mindfulness and meditation can be really useful for someone that's in a position where they're managing other people, right? They're responsible for other people at some level. So I'd really encourage you to go back to listen to that episode number 33, and I'll link that in the show notes. Just to start kind of with a follow-up from that conversation, Mike, let me ask you, we probably recorded that 2 years ago, maybe at this point. Are you still meditating? Do you still have a mindfulness practice? Have you ditched that?
I have kept it up. I've had some ebbs and flows, of course. I've had some times where I kind of lost the thread. And I noticed the difference. So I'm a big fan of it. I am still committed to my morning meditation practice, as well as finding those moments, throughout the day to take some brief moments of mindfulness. So the answer is yes, I'm still on track. And you?
Yeah, I'm still on track. Same thing, ebbs and flows. At times I'm doing the actual practice of meditation more than other times. But what I've found to be pretty cool, I would say probably in the last 6 to 12 months or so, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more today, is that I'm finding that integrating the mindfulness practice in kind of throughout my day is becoming pretty powerful, right? Meaning kind of in the past, my meditation and mindfulness practice was like in the morning when I'm sitting down to like do a actual meditation for, 15 minutes or so. I still do that, but I found that, just throughout the day, there's opportunities to just kind of be able to check in with myself. So it's still going for me and still seeing some benefits. Just real briefly, I know we covered this a bit in that other episode we did on mindfulness, but when you look out over the course of however long you've been focused on meditation and mindfulness, what would you say some of the main benefits that you've seen for yourself personally that's come from adopting this practice?
That's a great question. And I was going to actually ask the same thing. I think we're on the same page because I want our listeners to kind of be reacclimated to why we should be even doing this. And so I don't know, I would say, we know that meditation, among many, many things, it actually changes the brain. It impacts the part of your brain that's responsible for memory and attention and self-awareness. It calms down your sympathetic nervous system. So I've noticed those things for me. I think over the years, I've noticed that I feel like there's more of a natural ability for me to stay more focused and more present in situations. I think the moments where I get really triggered and I feel that whole sympathetic nervous system kick in and I go into fight, flight, or freeze or fawn, those have become actually much less frequent. and much less intense, much easier for me to recover from and get back on my footing. So there's a couple of the benefits I've noticed, among others. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo those things. As far as I can tell, at least, in terms of its effect on my performance throughout the day. Like, yeah, I feel like I have a better capacity to focus, right? And this is coming from somebody that has ADD, and I found that to be pretty beneficial, of just like, I can focus on one thing for a longer period of time, or not let myself get distracted, or rather, when I see myself getting distracted, I'm more quickly able to kind of bring myself back to the present moment and what I'm doing. But outside of that, I mean, that kind of helps with, again, like I said, performance and just work and stuff like that. That hasn't been the biggest benefit for me, though. It's a nice kind of cherry on top with it. But I would say the biggest benefit is just its effect on my relationships in my personal life and in my professional life as well. I would describe myself kind of at my baseline level, a pretty reactive, a pretty emotional person. And where it's benefited me the most is I think I'm able to slow down a little bit when those negative thoughts or emotions come up, or anger arises, or whatever the maybe negative emotion is. I'm more quickly able to kind of jump off that train, right? I'm more quickly able to see that these emotions and feelings are arising, and they're doing just that. They're just arising. And then I can make a better choice, right? I can make a choice not to go down that path, to slow down and react in a way that demonstrates care for another person, respect, that doesn't escalate a situation. I've just noticed, and I've gotten some good feedback, that my relationships have improved, right? Because I'm not as reactive.
That's
perfect. I still react strongly at times, but I've seen some improvement in that area. Yeah.
That's beautiful. And that's really consistent with what I've noticed in my life as well. I'm glad you shared that. I call it clarity. I've noticed that I have a greater ability to see what is actually happening in the moment. And that means everything from awareness of what's happening in me. I can see the defensiveness coming up, or I can see the fear, or I can see the anger, or whatever it is. I'm aware of it. And there's some time now that I didn't have before to kind of get around that, or to work past it, or, do whatever I need to do. But I also feel like I'm more clear about what's happening in the moment with the other person. Like, I'm just seeing things more clearly, as opposed to the stories that we tell ourselves, or all the lenses we look through. This person is trying to make me feel bad, or she's doesn't like me, or, it's not about me anymore, right? It's about looking at the situation and just seeing it more clearly. And that's probably been the greatest gift for me, is just that clarity.
Yeah. I love that clarity. I think that puts it very nicely. In a sense, it's, at least for me, it's not being so lost in thought all the time, or recognizing when I'm lost in thought and being able to come out of that a lot quicker. And I think maybe you'd agree, or maybe this is kind of what you're saying, that allows me to kind of tap into the relationship or conversation that I'm having without like so much of a focus on how am I showing up, how am I looking, right? And I think again, the other episode we did on mindfulness, you did the whole kind of Neo from Matrix analogy of kind of the bullets flying at you, and you being able to kind of slow down and see them. And so, I mean, I think we both agree we've seen a lot of benefits. What does your current maybe routine or practices look like in this domain?
Well, yeah, we can probably, let's break it down to sort of a, I think both of us have sort of a set or somewhat set sort of morning practice. Maybe start there. I think there's, of course, the other practices throughout the day, which I'm glad we're going to go there. I'm glad you teed that up. But as far as kind of the baseline morning thing, I've just committed and recommitted many times to at least an hour of alone time. And that's the container that I always shoot for, is whether that means going to a coffee shop, if I'm on the road, whether that's my favorite chair downstairs in my office with the heater going and my blanket, it's this time that I reserve every day to just be alone. And it takes on different shapes. I have different activities. It kind of depends on what's happening for me. But I would say the most consistent thing in there is for me about a 15 to 20 minute meditation time of just a quiet tuning in to what I'm feeling physically, listening to what's going on around me. Sometimes it's the breath that I'm focused on. Sometimes it's emotions that I'm kind of teasing out and sitting with and noticing. Again, different practices depending on the day, but at least 15 or 20 minutes of concentrating on something that has to do with my feelings, my sensations, my breath, whatever.
Nice. So there, it sounds like, at least for your structured practice, it's generally about kind of choosing one thing to just like totally focus in on? Or do you also practice, what people kind of call open awareness, mindfulness practice as well, where you just kind of pay attention to anything that comes up, whether that's thoughts, sounds, or things like that? Is that something you do sometimes?
Yeah, I kind of do the micro focus first, and then I usually end with several minutes of just sort of the opening up to, I call it opening up to the universe at that moment. Mm-hmm. And then let me just add one more thing. Because I'd forgotten this. I always engage in some form of self-compassion meditation every morning. That's become a really firm habit for me over the years. And so that during that time that I've just described, maybe afterwards, but some version of really sitting in my own compassion for myself. And that takes on lots of different shapes. I have a lot of different techniques for that, which we might not get into here. But I just think for me, and I would think for most people, I think it's really beneficial to not leave that part out, of making sure there's some loving kindness toward yourself involved in your morning daily meditation time.
Yeah, I agree. And we've talked a lot about self-compassion on this podcast and in our blogs and in our workshops. I know we both feel pretty strongly about the practice of self-compassion and just its positive effects on your relationships and, its effects on relationships within the workplace and just your overall well-being. Right. And we did a podcast episode about kind of a growth mindset and self-compassion and how those two things are intertwined. I'll link to that episode in the show notes as well. But yeah, so for me, it's my general routine. I'm kind of a routine type person. So my mornings generally look the same. And I try to fit in quite a lot of things in the morning before I start work. So I have found that just 5 to 10 minutes of some sort of sit down meditation is kind of the minimal dose for me that's effective, right? I actually have found that, I've gone through periods where I've done longer meditations every day, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And I think that's helpful. But I've discovered look, I can just do 5 or 10 minutes and I come out of that with just the better mindset for the day, right? A different type of focus for the day, a groundedness for the day. And to be honest, I'm not an expert in meditation or mindfulness by any means. But when people ask me, how do I get into this? How do I start a routine for myself? I often say, do 2 minutes every morning and do 2 minutes every morning until you're consistently doing that. And even 2 minutes has benefits. And then after that, you may go to 5 minutes or 10 minutes. But I find you actually don't need to do a lot to get some of the benefits of it. So, that's, again, usually in the morning. I sometimes use an app, which is some other advice I give people when they ask me. And so that's the main practice. I also kind of double dip sometimes. Like if I need to go walk my dog in the morning and I'm running short on time, I'll do a walking meditation. I'll walk the dog and just kind of have a meditation where I'm just paying attention to all the things coming into my vision there. Pay attention to what it feels like to take every step, breath feels like. So, and then like you said, and I think we'll talk about this more in a moment here, there's also a lot of kind of just little practices throughout the day that I would say is grounded in mindfulness and meditation. So
there's one more that I want to throw in for my morning, which you mentioned walking, and it just reminded me, this is actually a big deal for me. There's a process called grounding, and it is, I think it's really great for anyone, but it's actually been proven to be especially effective for anyone who has struggled with trauma in their past. And I would expand that to say anyone who's kind of their default mode network really leans toward the negative. It's this practice where you combine meditation with something that's very physical, where you're experiencing your body. So for me, it can include yoga. It can include maybe unofficial yoga, meaning just some really good stretching where in the midst of the stretching, I'm meditating on the sensation of the muscle being stretched. You can do the same thing running. You can meditate on this, on your body and the sensations of running. You can do it with any other kind of exercise or any kind of movement, really. But you take the moving and you add the focus meditation to the physical sensation, and you put those together, and you get this really, at least for me, you get this really cool sense of being very physically present in your world and very present in the moment. So I really like that. That's a really great addition to my morning routine that I added about a year ago.
Awesome. Oh, that's really cool. It's really cool. Again, you can kind of kill two birds with one stone if that's the way you want to look at it. I can go for a jog and meditate at the same time, do some yoga and meditate at the same time, right? Now, I want to talk a little bit more about some practices that we found useful to incorporate kind of just throughout our day. And because this is a podcast focused mainly on management and, within a work context, I want to kind of get down to the tools and tactics that we both use to stay mindful, whether that is being mindful in specific situations we deal with in the workplace or conversations that we have. And I'll start, and this is something that we talked about in a recent episode. When I go into a conversation, and this is something new that I've been practicing, but when I'm at work and I'm going into a conversation, either I need to give some hard feedback to somebody, or basically I'm generally feeling like there could be some emotions, some negative emotions that come up throughout this conversation at work. I just do sometimes like literally a 2-minute check-in with myself where I sit, I close my eyes, I breathe, and I just pay attention to how I'm feeling and thoughts and emotions that are arising. Am I feeling scared? Am I feeling defensive? How does my body feel? Am I kind of tight in the throat or in the chest? All right. And basically what I'm checking in with myself on is, am I kind of above or below the line right now? Right? Below the line being in kind of more of a state of defensiveness, fear, self-protection. Above the line in a state of more curiosity, learning, openness. And I find that, hey, the point is not that I need to come in every conversation above the line, but by checking in with myself to figure out where I'm starting from in this conversation allows me to make some better choices in that conversation. Once I'm aware I'm already coming into this conversation below the line, maybe in a defensive state, and I'm aware of that, I'm going to do some additional things in that conversation to make sure that doesn't show up and leak out on this person or people that I'm speaking with. So again, that's just a 2-minute practice I like to have before conversations. And I found big benefits to that, like benefits that I wasn't seeing in the past when I would wonder why these conversations were not going well. Well, I wasn't aware that I was starting from a place of defensiveness. So that is a little mindfulness practice that I use throughout the day. Do you do something like that? Or maybe what would be one of your, maybe we'll call micro practices or tactics that you use?
Yeah, I've got a few. And one I want to mention first is just such a great companion to what you just described. So I don't know, 2 decades ago or so, there's a meditation teacher, Michelle McDonald. She came up with an acronym called RAIN, and it really dovetails from what you just described. And I'll just really briefly go through RAIN with our listeners, because this is a practice that I engage in this practice when I become aware that there's something off inside of me, where I'm feeling triggered. I'm feeling really sad. I'm feeling afraid, whatever it might be. I'm trying to remind myself to engage in RAIN. And so real briefly, R in RAIN, RAIN, R stands for recognize, which is what you just described, Ethan. Just stop and notice and label it, call it what it is, because that can bring it to more of your upfront conscious mind, right? So I'm feeling anxiety, let's say. So notice it. That's what the R stands for. It stands for recognize. And then the A stands for allow the experience just to be there. And that is a practice that I think is really important for us as managers, for us as humans to learn, is that once you recognize the feeling, don't immediately try to get rid of it, right? Just allow it. You're human. It's a human emotion. There's nothing wrong with you for feeling it. So A is allow. I is investigate. Once you've sort of given yourself permission to have that feeling and not try to chase it away, you can move into investigation, right? What's going on here? And you investigate with care. You investigate with loving kindness. What am I thinking that's leading to this anxiety? What am I afraid of? And you can, when you're in that sort of calm state, I find that it's easier for me to figure out stuff, right? To figure out the connections. And then the N stands for nurture. Here we are back to self-compassion, right? Giving yourself some nurturing, some self-compassion, some empathy for having that feeling. Again, not beating yourself up for it, criticizing yourself for it. I found that when I go through rain, sometimes I might take a long time. I might take 10 minutes on it or more. Sometimes I might take 30 seconds on it, but it really helps me get grounded and centered and helps me to get the kind of distance and self-compassion that I need in the situation.
Nice. Now, is that something that you practice daily? Is that something that is more of a tool you pull out when you're feeling some sort of negative emotion? How do you use that? When do you use that in general?
That's a great question. I actually wish I practiced it daily because there are many, many opportunities that go by that I really could have used rain, but it's not a practice that I schedule for my morning or et cetera. This would be more of one of those situations that I would want to kind of pull out of my back pocket in the moment.
Very cool. Yeah, I've familiar with the practice. I've used it a few times myself. And I think one piece of the rain practice that you mentioned is something that I tend to incorporate throughout the day, which is this idea of not kind of running or trying to suppress the negative emotion, right? I think that's kind of one of the main sources of our suffering is that we're trying to avoid the negative feelings or we're trying to avoid the suffering in a sense, right? And so by just letting that emotion be there, experiencing it fully, it actually makes it easier to deal with that emotion as opposed to kind of getting worked up that you're feeling negative emotion and you're like, this needs to stop. This needs to go away. Well, I find that it normally doesn't. It normally snowballs and gets bigger or manifests itself in other negative ways later in the day. So I think that's really beneficial.
Yeah, and let me just throw out to our listeners here, there's a book called Radical Acceptance by Tara Brach, and she really goes into the rain practice and it's a beautiful book and she explores it pretty deeply. I would recommend Radical Acceptance to our listeners.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll link to that book in the show notes as well.
How about you, Ethan? What's another practice that you find yourself utilizing in the moment?
Yeah, there's this thing that I'm calling a mindful minute that I'm trying to sprinkle throughout my day. And I actually have a couple coaching clients that I've encouraged them to do it as well. And they're really finding a lot of benefit. And by the way, these are not people that have a daily practice. Like they don't sit down every morning for 10, 20 minutes, but they're incorporating these mindful minutes throughout the day. Right. And basically, when I am transitioning from one task to the next, I just take 1 minute. It might not even be 1 minute. It might be 30 seconds of just doing a little mini mindful practice. Just the other day, for example, I was working on writing up an article for our blog. After that chunk of time, I had a couple calls. And so what I did is I just allowed myself to end that task, the writing, a couple minutes early before those calls. And I just spend a minute just sitting back, closing my eyes sometimes, and just breathing, following the breath and checking in with myself, right? How am I feeling right now? Again, what are the thoughts that are popping up? What are feelings? What does my body kind of feel like right now? And just to kind of ground myself before I transition to that next task. Because what I often find for myself and for others that I've talked to, it's like, we just jump from one thing to the next throughout the day. We're in a fast-paced environment. We have many things to get done. And so I'm kind of jumping from one task without fully recognizing the state that I'm going into before the other task. Or I'm still distracted by that other task while I'm trying to do this new one. So that mindful minute, I find just super helpful. It's like, yeah, every time I'm transitioning a task, take 1 minute. It costs nothing. Right? We can all spare, I think, 1 minute between tasks. Again, the coaching client I'm working with, she's saying, look, I don't have time in the morning to sit down for 20 minutes, but this has really been helpful. And so I really encourage people to try that, right? And you don't have to be a super experienced meditator to do it. Just sit, follow the breath, check in with yourself. I find it really helpful. Have you done anything like that? Or kind of like these little moments throughout the day?
I do a brief focus meditation, like you've described, on my breath or on the sounds around me, but I haven't done it in transitions like you've just described. I really like that idea, like just being intentional about going from this to this next thing, taking a few moments and doing that focus meditation. I really like that. I do it more as I feel the need, right? So when I'm noticing something coming up or some anxiety or distractedness or something, I will stop and do just a brief version of my morning meditation, maybe just a minute of focusing on breath.
Yeah. I think one of the messages here is it's super accessible. It has profound effects. I mean, one thing that I've noticed just kind of coming back to the benefits we've seen is I'm able to be more focused in conversations when I'm taking a mindful minute right before that conversation. That matters, especially when you're managing people, right? The more you can be there, engaged, present, non-distracted when you're sitting down with your employee for a one-on-one or in a staff meeting, I think that's going to show up, right? That's going to show up, and it likely shows up in the form of demonstrating care and respect,
right,
to the other person, because you're there and engaged. So it really matters, I believe.
Can I mention another practice that comes up for me during the day?
Please.
Again, these are all kind of similar. I agree. It's good to have lots of different tricks up our sleeves, but I do this thing called being in the moment. And it's a very intentional practice that I think it's good for us to practice this whenever we think of practicing it. Like this would just be a great way to live, but it's also a good thing to grab when you're, again, feeling triggered or feeling distracted or something's going on. And it's just the simple experience of letting every single thing that's happening in the moment really wash over you, and even think of it as nurturing you. For example, most of the time when I'm just going to use a home example, I'm washing dishes, I'm probably not present too much, right? I'm partially present so I don't break glasses and drop plates, but I'm thinking about what I'm going to be doing next, or I'm worrying about something that I emailed earlier and I'm not sure I worded it well, or I'm doing something that is probably a little bit of my negativity bias and my default mode network kicking in. So instead, and surprisingly, this just takes a tremendous amount of discipline, but it's lovely. Just be right there washing dishes, and the feeling of the hot water on your hands, just experiencing it, right? And feeling the smoothness of the mug that you're washing, and hearing the sound of the water going down the drain. Just being there is so refreshing and nurturing, and it brings you into the present moment. And I'm starting to find myself, it's becoming easier to actually do that more often throughout the day. And my goal is to kind of live there. Actually, I did it during my shower this morning, the water, feeling the water. I've done it recently on a walk, just feeling the feet on the ground and the coldness of the air. So I think that's a practice that we can do at any moment throughout our day.
Yeah. Again, I love this because I feel like a lot of the themes of what we're talking about today is we're busy people. Many of our listeners are probably busy people, and there's moments throughout the day to incorporate this stuff. Right. Just in terms of what you're saying there, kind of practicing just being there in the moment. Now take that, from washing dishes and taking a shower and walking to whatever task you're doing at work. Mm-hmm. I can't remember who said this, but there was a quote the other day from some literature of like, the man lived 10 miles from his own head. Mm-hmm. Where, gosh, I'm guilty of this. We're all guilty of this, right? I'm doing a task or I'm in a conversation with somebody and I'm kind of focusing on it, but I'm also thinking about the next thing I have to do later, thinking about whatever it may be, my after work plans. Now, the difference between someone that is doing that and not aware that they're doing that, and someone that is aware and then makes the intentional decision to say, no, let me just focus completely on this task. That's a superpower in a sense, right? That's a superpower. It's superpower in terms of just, I think, producing better results, if that's what you're after, to having better relationships. The other thing I just want to mention here is that work and life is stressful. There's one real simple practice that it's kind of a mindfulness, but it's more of kind of a physiological tool here of using the breath to calm yourself down when you're stressed or worked up. I've heard it be called kind of the double inhale, exhale, where you take a breath and then sneak another breath in there and then let it out slowly through your nose or your mouth. That actually calms your physical state. It gets you back into kind of a mode of focus and out of the amygdala if you're in that mode. And so I think that's a tool that we can all use and practice. Well, folks, I know this was kind of wide-ranging today, but we thought it'd be fun to have a conversation more about mindfulness and our practices and what we found to be useful. I hope you found something useful from this. And
I did. I mean, I'm part of the conversation, but this is such a good reminder. This conversation has motivated me to recommit to these practices.
And I hope you all kind of get why it matters for yourself, of course, in your own health and well-being and mental capacity, but also for those relationships. Practicing mindfulness and meditation, I think, is a very much unselfish practice. So I will leave it at that today. Folks, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.